Hey everyone, welcome to an episode of my new series called Code Vibes, in which I share progress of my coding projects. In this episode, I would like to show you how I built Voxel Painter from scratch. It started as a simple idea but quickly spiraled into a sea of cubes, noise and a bunch of hilarious bugs. So let's dive into it, starting with the basics of what this tool can do. So it can paint using colors and voxels into a game area, and also it can allow you to simulate physics on the fly. Now let's look at how I actually build it. So first of all, I've started with a simplex noise, which I extended into 3 dimensions. In order to visualize it, I decided to utilize the GPU instancing that is built into Unity. First, I need to get all of these vertices, and then I need to convert them in a 4x4 matrix that I can actually render. Now I can utilize the graphics API called renderMeshInstance, into which I can pass my mesh, in this case a cube, and my instance data for each individual vertex. And so now we can see that the simplex noise is actually correctly represented, and we can move on to the next step. Alright, so I needed to make one single cube work with the marching cubes algorithm. This is no trivial task, but I will try to break it down a little bit. So first you define a bunch of vertices in 3D space that will represent your cube, and then you define edge connections on how you want to connect them inside that single cube. This results also in an edge connection table that you can use as a lookup. Once you have that, you can actually index into this cube edge flags, which will give you a unique integer that you can then use to index into a triangle connection table. All of this is pre-calculated and can be found online. Now then you need to actually create the marching cubes algorithm, as it's seen here. This is the beginning, and then once you have the cube that you are actually in, you can use the edges per cube to try to define your edges, and then you will calculate all of the triangles and insert them into a buffer. Totally easy peasy. Here you can see me changing the surface value. This is the value at which we define the border between nothing and something, and by moving that you actually define where the triangles sit. Actually, let me explain how this exactly works. So imagine you have a bunch of points in space, and one of them are ones and one of them are zeros, and then you have a surface of 0.5. Now it's pretty easy to put it in the middle because that's where we expect the surface to be. Now if you have it 0.1, again you would put it closer to 0, and then if it's 0.7 it will be closer to 1. Now this is all good and dandy, but now imagine you have a number 5 in the middle. So here you can actually see that the point would be very much closer to 0 than to 5, because it's such a large number. And this is what allows us to create very smooth meshes. So after I had one cube working, I decided to add more, and it wasn't that hard at all.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
So getting all that working wasn't definitely painful at all, but now we actually do have it working. So here you can see me doing a demonstration what it looks like when you disable the smoothing. And so it looks a little bit choppy and unsmooth. Now you can enable it again and then it looks nice and crisp. So I've been trying to play with this tool to kind of experiment and see where I can take it. And it was actually pretty fast considering it was done completely on CPU. Now something I was hoping to do was going onto GPU, but more about that later. Now as you can see, there is actually quite a nice shape here, and I believe this would be such a nice fidget toy if it was 3D printed, because it's most likely completely interconnected and it wouldn't fall apart. Yeah, so I was just exploring what I can do. I also just tried to render a single cube again, but now with the simplex noise, because now the simplex noise is sort of cutting through it, and you can sort of imagine this is actually a 4D shape where the 4th dimension is the frequency of the simplex noise. And so this reminded me of a game I played recently called 4D Golf, and in one of the levels you have a climb bottle, which is a 4D object, and you can slice it into 3D space by taking a look at it from different angles. And so that really reminded me of this, what I was seeing with the simplex noise, cutting into a singular cube. Now I'm gonna show you also some debug tools that I was using. Here you can see me actually visualizing each and every sub-vertex. Those are the ones which are created to allow for the marching cubes algorithm. And as I'm cutting through it, you can see that the sub-vertices are shifting around and moving to accommodate all of the triangles that need to be rendered. Here is how it looks if you render it on a huge amount of vertices. Something I was worried about was the performance, and I didn't like that I was rendering a lot of vertices overlapping each other, and so I decided to solve it at this moment. Now let's imagine a 2D case for a simple illustration. Now imagine you're creating a new cubes, and as you can see, you're sort of overlapping a lot of these vertices on top of each other. While this might not be an issue, it definitely did bother me because I was creating a lot of vertices, and since the vertices do scale with the second power in 2D grid and with the third power in the 3D grid, I was very concerned that this would be causing a lot of problems. Now when you think about it, you only need 4 vertices for the first square that you're going to be adding, and then for each another one you only need 2. And this is true both for the bottom row, but this is also true for the row which is on the left side, which you also need to fill in by 2 vertices per square. All of the ones in the middle are created with a single vertex. So you can add one single vertex and it will create a square immediately. Now let's calculate what it actually means. So if we are doing this algorithm that I described, it's gonna be 4 vertices for the first square and then x times 2 for all of the on the bottom row, and then y times 2 for all of the in the left row, and then you're gonna have the internal, which is gonna be x times y. Now if you were doing 4 vertices per each square, that would be 4 times x times y. If the x times y is really big and all of the other ones don't matter, then by doing this smart algorithm you can actually save a lot of vertices and end up at 1/4 of the vertices. Now if we extend this into 3D case, there's actually 12 vertices that you're gonna have to be adding per cube, because 1 vertex per edge. Actually, it ends up being 1/12 of the total vertices if you're doing the smart method. And so that's about a 10x improvement. That is actually very nice, and you're going to be saving a lot of data by doing this. And so implementing this wasn't definitely hard at all. And so we arrive here. It actually works again, and we can visualize this beautiful mess of things. In order to get it working, I needed to create a transformational matrix that allows us to index from the local space into the global space. This is not very easy to do, as everything is flattened into single array, and that makes it very hard to figure out where you actually need to index. The trickiest things were the sub-vertices, which are way more complicated, but I managed to get even those working in the end. So with that out of the way, I could actually focus on some interesting things like messing around with materials or messing around with lights. One slightly annoying thing that I sort of didn't understand in the beginning, but I figured out at the end, was that my normals were inverted, and so the light calculation was done in the opposite direction. This is quite confusing because you can see the light is eliminating the surface from sort of inside to outside. It's kind of hard to understand, but I managed to fix that and invert them back. So then I was experimenting a little bit with light inside of these caverns made of the simplex noise, and it was actually quite amazing to take a look at it. It doesn't look that pretty right now, but it just felt really good to get something finally working. And it sort of reminded me of spelunking in a cave with a flashlight and trying to figure out where we are and where to go. Something that I also enjoyed is setting the material to reflective and then flying through it. It was just so trippy to do. I love that. Then I focused on creating terrain, and it wasn't very easy. The pearly noise wasn't working with me for a while, and I didn't realize that it actually returned the same value every time you would query it with integers, which made no sense to me, but that's how it works, at least in Unity. So I needed to fix that, and after that I could try to paint it using a custom shader, and that worked very nicely as a prototype. I kept iterating on the visuals for a while until I was settled with something that could work, and I try to then paint into it using a brush. The painting wasn't very fast, and there were two reasons for it. First of all, I was using the mesh collider to generate the mesh with which the brush would collide. This isn't very fast approach, as you have to generate a lot of data, especially for bigger meshes. And much better approach would be to use some sort of voxel ray tracer, which I actually then implemented. The second reason why it was slow is that every time you would paint, it would create a new list of vertices that it would push into the mesh renderer. This does sound smart because you're not actually pushing vertices which you're not using by the triangles, but it does mean that you do need to create that array of vertices every single time you paint. And that's actually very slow because you're allocating new data all the time. So in the end, it's much better to just have this huge array of triangles and vertices and just don't care that it sometimes has invalid data. Anyway, vertices are not going to get rendered unless a triangle is using them. There's actually also a third reason why it's slow and why it also doesn't look very good, and that is I was smoothing the normals every single frame. When I stopped doing that, not only did the performance improve, but it actually looked way better. I needed to of course calculate how to do the flat shading, and for that I'm using a fragment shader that calculates it using derivative functions that are available in Unity. Since we are on the topic of shader graph, I would also like to show you how I designed the system to do the colors. So here you can see that I first calculate a pretty complicated noise that I shove into vertices. And then because I can use interpolation on the fragments, I can actually utilize that to then sample that noise, nice and interpolate it. And I can use that to sample into my color data, and that will give us a little bit of an offset, which makes the terrain look way more natural. Of course, I wasn't still happy with the performance, so I tried to tweak it a little bit, and then, well, it just disappeared. And that was the last straw for the day because I was just getting so tired of all of these problems. And so I booted up Minecraft and started playing with fish. And I started shoving fish into this small hole and they started dying. I don't know, I guess that was because I was in so much pain from all of this programming that I was doing. And so I created a small aquarium, as you can see me trying to shove the fish inside of there, and it just doesn't work as I would like, so I have to kill all of the fish. Fun times, eh? But then finally the fish stays in the aquarium, and that gives me enough courage to continue, and that led to me creating this video that I've already posted on my channel. So I don't want to spend too much time showing it off, but I do like it, and I especially like that you can add light because it's in Unity, and you could technically make a full game out of this. You could then again generate the mesh collider at some point. It doesn't take that long, I think it's about 0.2 seconds on my PC. Then you can add light, and you can add all of the other effects that you would want. Of course, as a fan of Minecraft, I also had to go underground and dig a cave and put a light in there, and that just, I don't know, it just looks so awesome. Maybe it's just because I've created it, but I think it looks very nice. When I was playing with the size of the brush, I accidentally deleted the whole world, but the funny thing is that you can actually recover it partially as long as all of the values don't go to 0, because the values might still be there, it's just that they are below the surface value. And so if you increase your brush size and then paint back over everything, it's gonna add them so much that they actually surpass the surface. So I added the GPU processing using compute shaders, and it worked first try. Finally it works. And to test it, I decided to take the Bad Apple video and render it using my Voxel rendering pipeline. And it actually looks really nice. I was quite excited about this. I created a video dedicated specially to this, and I think it just rocks. It took me a while to find a good style in which I would like to render the Bad Apple, but in the end I settled on a white canvas, which actually has a third dimension that I created using the mip maps, which essentially allowed me to blur the image and create a Z dimension to it. I couldn't render it in an extremely high resolution because it still had some performance issues, but it was actually quite a big step up now. And it was running so smoothly that I could render the Bad Apple in real time. To make it look really nice, I added some colored lights, that's why it's not totally white. By the way, this is my favorite shot. Boom. And here you can see it from the side view, so you can actually see that it has that third dimension in which it is actually kind of thick. I wasn't totally satisfied how I had the colors implemented into it, and I actually wanted to paint them using my paintbrush. And so for that I actually tried to represent them inside of the vertices by, instead of using a floating point number between 0 and 1 to represent their existence, I would actually use an integer where the first 11 bits I would dedicate to the value itself, which would be again mapped between 0 and 1. And then the rest of the bits, actually it's 21 bits that are remaining in a 32-bit integer, they were dedicated to actually hold the color information. So that is 7 bits per channel. Well, that might seem quite low, it's actually enough, and it didn't really matter for my use case at all. So something that I just was showing here, it looks like a candy, is actually a glitch where the vertex color values were injected into the wrong IDs, which leaked them all over the place. Fortunately, it wasn't too hard to fix, and soon I got it working. So since I had this way of creating a nice landscape, I started making a lot of volcanoes. And that was a lot of fun for quite a while. I really wanted to expand on it and add more precision to the colors, which led to some very interesting bugs where all of the colors were completely jumbled. But I got that sorted out of the way and continued on in my journey. One thing that I always liked was voxel physics, and especially these sort of sandbox games, and so I couldn't pass upon the opportunity to add physics to this toy as well. The physics are happening inside a computer to make it extremely fast. It didn't work right away, as usual, but after a bit of tweaking I managed to get it working. And this is what happens when you try to play League of Legends while your mind is on something else. So anyway, back to Voxel Painter. So I've got it working, I fixed all of the bugs and make it super performant. I was very impressed where I was taking this tool now. And on the right side you can see the new UI that I implemented. You've probably seen it in a few of the videos as well. And it's something that I've been adding while developing the tool itself. You may have gotten the impression that it actually looks a bit like the Townscaper, and that's actually by design. I was very much inspired by that game, both to create this tool and learn about procedural generation. Here is a short Miro page that I've created to track all of my tasks and ideas, what I want to implement in the future. You know what is a good idea? To like this video and subscribe to my channel. You might be wondering how I did that last segment. It's actually a tool that I implemented late into the development, and when you create a new terrain, you can actually import a height map as an image, and it can also interpret that color of that image as the color of the terrain that it's going to generate. So here you can see me generating a bunch of different terrains from some funny images. One last thing that I wanted to improve is that the edge of the map is not really visible, but you can paint on it, which doesn't give you a very good UX. So here you can see me tweaking a shader code to draw a grid on the sides of the voxel painter. Now to show it all the time would be a bit intrusive to the player, and so the way I decided to render it is that it actually renders on top of the selection gizmo that you can paint with, and by doing that it's actually only visible when the gizmo is touching the edge. Other than that, it has just the color of the background and it fades in. So this is pretty much it for the development of Voxel Painter at the moment. I'm considering developing it further if there is interest, but right now I'm thinking about shelving it for a while until there is some interest or I want to come back to it. It was a very nice project, and if you made it this far, I'm very thankful for that, and I hope you have a greatest day. See you all next time!